How do we remain in balance as an impacted person who is heavy in this work? Um, the balance between not facing burnout, not completely getting lost into the necessary code switch that we have to do to even be in the room in these spaces, just to be real transparent in what we're talking about. How do we maintain that balance, especially with us roaring in this mission? And we know how important it is to show up in the room because somebody has to go before. Somebody has to stand in the gap. And so we have volunteered to do so.
Can I admit to you, Jem, that I struggle with this business of balance? What is that? What is it? How do you how do you achieve that? It is something that I struggle with. Let me, and just to give you a sense of why that is the case, over the past just 5 years or so, Matt has mentioned my pretrial detention work. Matt has mentioned my pretrial monitoring work. Matt, I'm not sure, knows of my work where I look at how individuals who've been impacted by the system, what their perceptions are of like fair chance employment policies, ban the block policies, automatic record clearance. So I've done research on each of those topics. I've looked at research looking at decline to prosecute. Policies and how those impact people who are brought into the system, with attention to what this means for racial disparities, what it means for people's lived experience, what differentiates the person who's prosecuted versus not, despite the fact that they look almost exactly the same. That's more research. I've done research looking at the impact of police violence. How do we make sense of the violence that people experience by talking to people who have experienced it and trying to make sense of those interventions. Also looking at the impact of or racial disparities in police harassment and what this means for people's health and well-being, how this impacts or leads to higher rates of chronic health issues, for instance. That's just a kind of a snapshot of what it is that I've been working on. And I say this honestly, not to brag, but over the last 5 to 6 years, this is what I have been doing, and my team has been doing. It's a lot of different projects to work on, all driven by the fact that I feel like we need to understand what impacts these systems are having. We need to understand how it is that people are understanding their experiences in this system and what they see as potentially kind of a relief. A way to unburden them by these experiences, what kinds of policies matter, and in what ways do they matter. And it's exhausting. Like you, I say this because like you, I feel driven to answer these questions so we could better understand it. And I think that drive has been a problem. So I'm doing this work and trying to connect with folks for whom these kinds of projects matter because they want to affect change, they want to make change. But I've been doing it out of balance. I've not been making enough time to rest. I've not been making enough time to spend with people that I love and care about. I've not been just being. And I think it's extraordinarily important for us to do that. I think that that's true across the board. But as a Black woman, and I know how other Black women that I know behave in not just in this realm, but other realms, this sense that we have to get things done in order to improve the conditions of the communities that we care about, broadly speaking, means that we often go too far. We're not taking care of ourselves in the ways that we do. We kind of almost become martyrs. And I think that we need to take care not to do that, because we need to be doing this over the long term. And in order to be able to stay over the long term, we need to be sure we're taking care of each other, ourselves and each other. We need to place some guardrails around what it is that we do. We need to be focused on some things, understanding that we can't do everything. We need to figure out ways to feed ourselves, to refill our cups, because once it gets depleted, it's often very difficult to get the energy. I often feel burnt out. That's not a way to be in this situation. This problem that we're trying to confront has been decades in the making. Right. And that's just the mass incarceration era. It doesn't even account for the deeply oppressive systems that even came before this, right? So just in the we're not going to solve this in 5 or 10 years. This is a long haul kind of fight. And I think it does require us pacing ourselves, being connected with others in community who are also doing this kind of work, and making sure we're supporting each other through that. You say balance. I ask you. I implore you to figure out what that means for you and to give that to yourself, that being the gift that you give to yourself, because without it, it becomes really difficult to sustain this over the long term. I wonder to what extent Michael and Kyle have also been struggling with this question of balance in this really important work that we've been trying to do.
I, like you, think everything needs to happen now because it's imperative. And especially having been in the system and especially watching its effects on people, and now having some ability to actually be able to do something, and how that being energized means that you do realize that my two little puppies are important. Being able to move to a place where I can actually have an office and you don't look in my kitchen is important. And, being able to take that time to get refueled, because if you work the workhorse to death, you don't have a horse.
Yeah.
And people are important to me. And I think, there's something that I love about being, 60 is that you do get that you need to take a breather or you won't be able to complete the work. And I went to a death penalty. It was a lifting up of the two gentlemen that paid, great amounts of their life to it. And one had a walker and one was in a wheelchair. And just realizing that when you buy into trying to make the system different, it is a lifetime investment. And, just realizing that and just doing all that you can on a daily basis, and knowing that you are making a difference, whether or not statutes are changed or laws are changed. When you're engaging people who don't even realize about our justice system or our carceral system, be it at church, at a picnic, at the grocery store, anywhere where you can have a conversation about incarceration, because it is the out of sight, out of mind. Nobody talks about it.
I'm hearing like two things here, thinking of two things here. So I see the balance of our own individual selves in the work that we do, and even being system impacted and working in this field. For sure. It's just, I would say it's very similar, akin to any sort of case management system or role. Or really just like lots of different kinds of work. Like you're going to run into a wall or hit burnout, and then there's the tons of different self-care remedies and workshops and different things that we can do. I do like the idea of really honing in on ourselves and focusing on ourselves to see what it is we need, and that I think we really find what I think we really find not just what works for us, but that the fact that just about everybody else is going to have something different that works for them, depending on the time, place, access to resources, things like that. But the other part, the other imbalance is what you brought up. It's hard not to call you Dr. Smith, so Sandra. What you brought up, Sandra, was the imbalance for like folks who are system impacted coming into these roundtables and or these different pretrial agencies or different criminal legal system agencies, and having almost like shifting a mentality from like a warrior on the front line, advocating for those still involved, to now almost like equal with people who have no involvement, and kind of viewing clients or other system impacted people through a lens that's similar to those that don't have the experience. And that is like 100% true that happens. But it is interesting when you get to these positions where like we're in this room here and we are empowered to feel equal despite the level of education, experience, economical status, whatever. We're empowered to feel equal, but then I think we have to be safe in guarding our integrity and our passion that brought us to the work in the first place. Because what I'm learning personally is that in these spaces, what I think is going to matter most is that we all carry our individual stories through these spaces and they keep getting repeated.
Mhm.
I came into this space and others before thinking like I had to bring something new. As a system impacted person coming to the table with professionals who've been in it for a long time too, but on the other side of the fence, I really thought I had to bring in like crazy new world changing ideas. And I still want to. Uh,
Yeah.
but I thought that that was required. And what I'm learning is that really I just need to show up as myself, bring my story so more people hear it, because any one of our stories alone has enough knowledge information to generate impactful potential outcomes for other things that we're doing. Like it has the potential to, we have the potential to glean a lot of really great information that can be used and applied in other ways from just even one of our stories or even pieces of our story. So that's how I think that we can show up, kind of and bring that balance.
I think that that makes so much sense. I just wanted to say two things that your comments, Michael, bring up for me before I give it back to Jem so she can come back into this discussion. And that is one, you mentioned how like important it is that you think it is for us as individuals to kind of take care of ourselves. We know what we need, and we should be attentive to that. I agree completely. But I would actually take it to the next level. I really hope that when we're doing this work, we're doing it in a community of other folks who are committed to the same things. And so we don't have to go back home in our separate spaces to take care of ourselves. That part of the caretaking happens in the context of community, that we're feeding each other, right? We're taking care of each other. And I feel like that is so much, that makes us so much stronger. I will admit to you that I'm in a place now in my life where I hate how we talk about self-help in this way that makes it seem like you go fill your bathtub and you get into the tub and then you soak for a little bit and then all of a sudden, no, so much of I think the kind of rejuvenation, the healing, et cetera, that we experience, I think comes through our connection with other people. I think that that's what makes this work be sustainable. And I fear to the extent that we feel like we're fighting the fight in the group or whatever, and then we go home to take care of ourselves. I think part of the process of rejuvenating is also a process that takes place in the context of our communities too, that we get loved on, we support each other, we take care of each other, and that is a part of this whole process. And so it's something that honestly, Michael, I'm trying to create for myself. But I hope that for the rest of us, all of what I've read and from the folks that I've spoken to, it's those who are deeply embedded in those kinds of networks and communities who seem to be able to sustain over the long term because they have that network of support. And it's something that I want in my life. And then the other thing that you said that I think is really interesting, and it piggybacks too off of something that Jem said. Jem mentioned code switching. I don't know if you'll be annoyed with me by saying this, but it's of course something I feel like I've experienced. Like I'm a Black girl from Hartford, which is a poor city. That where I am now is not where I was predicted to be. Right. I'm a child of immigrants, grew up working class, etc. My path was not to any institution of higher education, much less a professor in them, and certainly not the kind of premier institution. And so it's always been a struggle for me, Jem, Michael, and Kyle, to work on being my authentic self in these spaces, because I am not my colleagues. I don't come from the backgrounds that the vast majority of them come from. The vast majority of them come from families where both parents have a college degree and in many cases a PhD. My parents came to this country without a high school diploma. I am not them. I come with my special talents, my special way of saying things. And the truth of the matter is I never felt more free than when I let go of this idea that I had to be code switching and just was myself, my brilliant self, the way I am brilliant. And I think we need to really embrace who we are in these spaces. You don't have to be them. We don't have to be them. We can be ourselves, and we bring our specialness, our uniqueness, our understanding that is unique. about these experiences and what kinds of things need to be done in order to address these issues. So I hear you when you say there's that struggle. I feel like I need to show up and be able to talk the way they talk or whatever. Or that's how I interpret what you're saying. It's something I struggled with for at least a decade. And the point at which I said I am no longer doing this was the point at which I felt free. And it's also a point at which I just took off, right? It made a huge difference. And so, to the extent possible, I would ask you to be your brilliant self the way you are and not feel like you have to bend. Why your uniqueness is what makes you of value in this space. Don't be trying to be anybody else, because that diminishes the uniqueness that you bring into the space, the value that you bring into this space.
I love to uplift this exact conversation because so many in my communities are struggling with these identity crises. And it is something that I have gained freedom from. And I desire everybody in any area of any influence of mine to have that freedom. Because once you have that after such captivity, whether it's inside of these walls or on the other side of have never experienced incarceration, you have experienced some type of incarceration. What I want to speak on right now is the impact you spoke on that ties all of this into me. The community care aspect, it for me is the solution. That is my life work, because I did not get into the situation that caused me to cause harm to an individual to save my life by myself, and I did not receive the help that I received during my journey by myself. So it all stems to the root that you spoke on, the factors of what is the beginning and the root called root creation of policies. Policy, how was that, why was policy created? You alluded to that a little in your discourse with Matt, and for me that root never intended to have people in consideration when policy was created. So for me, looking at how can I go into these hard places, ask myself, and get accustomed to the uncomfortable feeling before anybody even know what I'm able and capable of bringing. And that's what I did previously. So the impact, Michael, for me is never what I can say to somebody. It's not about your story. And like Dr. Smith said earlier, it's about you, period. It's about Dr. Smith. It's about her specifically. It's about Kyle specifically. For me, that little girl who was lost inside of that pretrial detention, praying for a Dr. Smith who was not to come until 10 years down the line, but she's here now. So now I get to sit in the room and ask her what's her thoughts on the root causes of how policy never had empathy or humanity intended in the creation.
Yeah, most definitely. I really like that, Gem, actually, because it speaks to, I think, again, a different conversation maybe, but like the healing part of this journey and it all. And over these last, what, like 5, 10 years, the whole um bringing up like the inner child and whatnot, that work and everything, that's real stuff. And what you're speaking to is mine, is my inner child, because it is that person who maybe wasn't there when we were younger, who we later on become for ourselves. Like we become that, maybe what we thought was missing throughout life. That's kind of what I got from it. And I hope that's what it was, because it's sinking in and it's settling. So I'll pause there.
I was just going to say that I think that the carceral system and the justice system is kind of like a train. And when you're on the train, you don't get to see the caboose, you don't see the engine, you don't see where it's going or where it's come from. And once you're out of the system, so to speak, you can see that caboose, you can see that train just a little bit more and where it needs fixing and the things that are broken within it. And I know that that's what happened for me after I got out of incarceration. I was able to take a look at dollar figures and take a look at people. And the thing that spurred me the most was when I left, there was a gal who had come back to prison for her fourth time, missing more teeth and having more children and never getting programming the entire time she was there, and just starting to really look at how that engine operates and how ineffectively and who's gaining from it running the way that it is. And I think that you hit the nail right on the head where you said the system is operating exactly how they want it to work. And when that big change happened in the 1980s and mandatory sentencing and the enterprises that were brought into prison to make money, all of those things are still so embedded in that system and working so well for those who are making money off of the backs of other people and their families and such, and really trying to engage our communities in those conversations of what you bought into and what fear propaganda you were sold, and just being able to inform people about that. And I love that. I love being able to have the experience to talk about it and to have, well, I like to hope a really good, friendly disposition while I'm talking about it. I make a joke a lot about, it's an uncomfortable, being comfortable with an uncomfortable topic is hard. I have a orange polka dotted dress that I wear to many places because it's friendly, it's opening, it's non-threatening, and that's sometimes what we need to get that conversation started with people who really don't want to talk about the carceral system. And one of the things that is here in Oregon is when we talk to legislators, the legislators are like, oh, the Department of Corrections handles that. Oh, they're doing a great job. Oh, the public defenders handle that. They're doing a great job. Well, no, they're not doing a great job. And these are the figures and these are the things that are showing that. And I think that that's the opportunity that we have is to break that myth. And I think that that's the opportunity that we get to bring into these spaces is that, yes, having been in the train and now being able to look at how it operates and knowing that it could run so much better for people.
What comes up for me is the kind of cycles of contestation that we go through. But I also am very aware that there's almost always a backlash and a kind of, in many cases, even a backsliding, because the very forces that you talked about that are against some of the measures that activists are pushing for greater kind of just outcomes in this space continue to fight to roll those back, right? We've seen this with regards to there's a way in which we've been here before. We've seen this with regards to a whole host of progressive moves recently. So if you take, for instance, cash bail reform, which was, I think, a really big thing, say, between 2015 up until 2020, 2021 or so, in many of the places where that happened, we see that being rolled back. New York is a prime example, just hugely important legislation that made a big difference in the lives of people who were brought into the system, and where there's absolutely no evidence of significant increases in crime or anything as a result. We see the backlash because, as you point out, people are easily made to fear the potential of crime. Even disorder occurs to people as crime. And instead of dealing with the issues that might produce disorder, perhaps we need to be investing more trash cans for on the streets or some such thing. I mean, they're often relatively easy fixes. And in some cases, they're fixes that will require more in the realm of better care, and accountability for people who are struggling. But it's easily leveraged to say we are unsafe. We need to pull back on these laws that are too easy and that lead to rising rates of crime. And then we find ourselves back in the same place that we were before. I think that's one of the things that I find exhausting about this, that there's a constant push and pull. And so I find in doing this work, it's really important. Part of the reason why it's so important for us to pace ourselves is because we can make inroads 1 year, but 2, 3, 4 years down the line, we're fighting the same battles again. And I'm at the point now, folks, where I'm just going to resubmit op-eds that I wrote before because it's addressing the same thing that I said and got published a couple years before, right? We're back in the same space. And so while I do think I feel, how do I put this, Kyle? I feel a little sensitive about this idea that what progress means, because for me, even when we make progress, we should expect the backlash because there are forces who benefit from exactly how the system is now, and they will achieve some measure, right? And so we're back, and so we have to keep fighting in order to. So it's really more like this as opposed to improvement, a kind of like unsteady improvement. I feel like it's a contestation, a cycle of contestation that we have to keep fighting. And it's important for us to keep fighting because what are we going to do? But it's frustrating to know that there's so many people who benefit from and are invested in oppressive systems.
I'm over here in absolute agreement as well. Talking about how do we understand the impact? How do you explain to those in your area of influence with your research that you have absolute factual based data here with of X, Y, and Z of hey, this happened and now we're right back, like you said, secular. We're right back in the current events. The narrative is being pushed about the super predator with the kid with the juveniles. The narrative now we have an epidemic again. So now we are walking back more than just the death penalty. We're walking back everything, and it is alarming, and it is current. This isn't what happened years ago. So how do we deal with that? How do we actively buckle down? What do we do right now since this is current? Understanding the impact.
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I mean, we have to stay mobilized. Our communities of advocates and activists, and including and especially members of communities that, of course, we want members of communities that are impacted, but I actually think we need to do the work to engage folks who don't necessarily know that these are the things that are happening, but that they're harming the broader community because they're harming some segments of our community. And showing up, right? Showing up to the town halls, showing up to the state capitol. I think sometimes it actually might mean, and this is not necessarily, in my opinion, not necessarily a part of American culture, but sometimes I think we might have to shut systems down in order to get heard. Like where does our power lie? Our power lies in our numbers. And if we can get numbers of people to shut stuff down, in ways that stop any kind of movement of important systems. I mean, of course, it's going to be a situation that will lead to lots of law enforcement attention, but to the extent that we can remain in those places where we non-violently kind of make it so that systems just can't operate until we get heard and get our issues addressed. I fear that we will just continue to find ourselves in these situations. And it's not an easy thing. This kind of movement work, it could take years, right? If we think about the Montgomery bus boycott, that took over a year of walking to work before the system was willing to change and allow people to sit wherever but I think that that's the kind of thing that is required, but it's often a thing that we're not willing to do. We actually do things like, let's have this 1-day strike, right? It's going to be on this day. It's going to last for this long. along, and then we're going to go home and we're going to do this other thing. We often do things that are very temporary, doesn't really do much to really slow or stop systems completely, doesn't threaten profit margins of companies that are behind these behind some of these bills or legislation. I think we actually need to begin to do the work of making it clear that our society can't function without us, and we refuse to allow it to function until we get just policies put forward. And so I really think it really requires doing more than what I think we tend to do at this point. If we really think about the major kind of legislative moves that have happened in our country, not even thinking about other countries, the kinds of protests were on the level of like national, like kind of what we saw after George Floyd, but that lasted for years, right? That's what got us the New Deal. And the Fair Deal. It's the equivalent of that got us something with regard to that got us the civil rights legislation, et cetera. It's years long kind of push for these things that it takes in order to get the kind of justice that we're looking for. And I think unless we're willing to fight in that way, I think that we will struggle. I think we can continue to expect what it is that we're seeing here. And even with the wins, even if we win in those cases, we should expect forces to be all rallying immediately to try to undo what has been done. But that's what it takes to get true transformation. And I don't know that we as a society are willing for that, to do that.
I'm sorry, Dr. Smith. I also wanted to say that I totally agree with working with unlikely allies. And my tenets are it's going to take all of us. And my example was used because in a very tough on crime, it was a bipartisan effort, which got us the success. And so in this crises, it is going to take all of us. In your pretrial research, your work delved in the effects that it has on the consequences that it has on the communities and individual families. And I don't know what Kyle and Michael feel about this, but about with what Dr. Smith just said, and if we was to be able to promote or spotlight the consequences of not acting in these communities, we're trying to get to, hey, listen, look, listen, and time is now. What do you all think about that in her parts of research? What are the consequences that you notice for individuals and families in that area?
I know that, and this ties in well with what you're saying. I think that in our current presidential climate, I think that the cutting of Medicare and the cutting of so many funding and services and things like that, I think that in and of itself heightens people in their own fear. And so to get the criminal justice issues up there, everybody's dealing with Medicaid, everybody's dealing with education, they're dealing with so many other things. This definitely falls way, way, way down. And you need to let people know that when people can't afford their health insurance, they can't afford groceries, they can't afford things, crime is going to be the end result, because they need to feed their kids, they need to do this, they need to, or they can't pay their insurance, or they're, driving uninsured, or they're doing different things and they're falling in arrears, and those lead to criminal acts.
I would say, I mean, I would agree with a lot of that. And I've spent a lot of unpaid hours trying to figure this out, trying to figure out what connects people. What's the golden, what's the key? What's the golden ticket to where anybody, regardless of their political siding, regardless of their belief systems, anything, that they land on some sort of common ground. I keep coming back to money. Excuse me. I think money speaks a lot to people in a lot of different ways. People have hardships with money or great ships with money, but it just flows through people's households and in their lives in different ways than maybe they realize. And I've had a lot of success with, it's easy to find nefarious things that elected government officials are doing with our taxpayer dollars, or to find how our taxpayer dollars are being inappropriately used or allocated or whatnot. And sometimes even inadvertently. Sometimes there's people pressing the button to transfer funds to something that they're just pressing the button because they were told to. So like, or I think this speaks to the higher level of policy making anyways, when there's not the consideration for the people on the ground level who are going to be directly impacted by the application of this policy. And that's where I think that money speaks to, regardless of where you're at, whether you're on the highest status or not in life, money is going to speak to you in that way. And I think if you knew really how much you were spending and wasting of your tax dollars that you're paying for every year, how much you're actually wasting on systems that continue to perpetuate the problem, you would be enthralled a bit. Homelessness is a great example. There's over 500,000 folks who are designated homeless in America. That number varies depending on different factors. But when you do the math for supportive systems, just on homelessness, homeless supportive systems and measures and whatnot, clinics, things like that, when you do the math on it all, what you come to find is that it would cost less in 1 year to house every person who's unhoused right now in America than it does to continue to put into these different systems that aren't producing long-term effective results. So I think money speaks a lot to people, and that's kind of the route that I've been taking lately. I think that the standard narratives for people that are justice impacted was like sustaining itself for a long time. I think that the cultural narrative was that people impacted by the system, there might be something wrong with them, or there was some kind of inefficiency, imbalance, or something. There's something up with them, and they could potentially do something that could be harmful, whatever that might be, regardless of knowing any of the facts of the cases or anything like that. What I think that it's turning into is more and more people become justice impacted in one way or another, more families are impacted inadvertently. And so there's more people who, it could be a third cousin of, not having any impact, and then they hear of a family member having it, and that's enough for them to have a relationship to the issues, and maybe enough for them to open their minds on it. But I think even more than that is what we're doing here, which is we are the evidence. We're showing up. We are the evidence of how the system has worked. And maybe we actually have some great ideas on the inefficiencies of the system and what possible solutions to those might be. But I think we're changing the narrative when we show up and we say, yeah, I did a bunch of time. Yeah, maybe even I admitted to doing some heinous stuff. Maybe that's even the case. Wherever I stand in that now, I'm here now advocating for these noble causes and for these injustices in the system. I think that that's enough to show that, hey, I'm here. So there's something to this. There's something to this story and others like me that can have value to it. Otherwise, we wouldn't be here. We wouldn't have been invited. Otherwise, I wouldn't have got that first job. And the person hiring me told me, she said, we're hiring you because I told her, I said, is it a problem that I just came back from prison a month ago? And she said, we're hiring you because you just came back from prison a month ago. It's those types of things that are changing the narrative, in my opinion.
And so just to kind of push this a little bit further, Michael, I don't know how else to say this, but to say this, or to ask it, how do you know you're not a token? And I ask this because of this, like what we want to do is to transform a system, right? Hiring you is great because of the unique insights you bring and the kinds of changes you would advocate for. But we do need fundamental, like transformative change in order to stop these systems from doing the kind of harm that they do. And what we know to be the case is that while diversifying workforces can do work around the edges, the nibbling around the edges, it doesn't transform, right? And so I hear you, and of course, I'm thrilled that you're in the position that you're in, Jem, that you're starting the business that you're starting, and Kyle, that you keep going to the Oregon State House to do the work that you're doing. But is that enough? to fundamentally transform systems that have been in place for decades and have done so much harm to, frankly, specific communities, and one could argue, and thus for the broader society. Is that enough? Because when
Yeah.
I talk to people, I feel like the narratives are still very much the same. You got caught up because you did something. And even if you didn't do what they said you did in that instance, you did something before that required you to be there. And still a lot of fear around people who have criminal legal system contact. So it's just to be honest with what I feel like I am hearing and what I sense based on my understanding of research and my kind of observations of change, that uh, that you being in a space is important around the margins, not in terms of transformation. I'm putting it out there just to continue, just to have a real conversation.
I,
Yeah. Oh, if I could just real quick answer the
Please,
question of do I
please.
think I'm a token? Sure, sometimes. Sure. And you know what? I will own it because that's actually what's gotten me into get into places where I can show up as myself, where I can show up with my story, my narrative, and help to change it for myself and others. So sure, I do think at times, I do think at times I'm tokenized. But you know, there were over 100 people that applied to be justice policy consultants, for example, with CEPP, with lived experience. That was a part of the application. And, you know, us here and a dozen others were selected out of those hundreds of people. And so I think that we're entering into a space going from this tokenizing of it and diversifying the workforce into here's where I truly believe it. And we should have a resource coming out soon about peer supports and bringing elevating people
Yeah,
with lived experience
yeah.
into these spaces. I believe we are moving and shifting into a position where there's no stopping people with lived experience entering into these spaces because you have all these beautiful people who have the lived experience, but then they are getting the education. They are pushing their foot into the door. They are being invited into the spaces, not as not as a token, but as a professional, like, wow, we actually really see value in this over people with degrees and whatnot. So that's what I think we're moving into is this space where there's no stopping putting us in positions of power and decision making tables. I don't think there's anything that can stop us.
And yet rates of incarceration are beginning to climb back up, and a whole bunch of other really problematic outcomes that we thought we were doing work to improve seem to be reversing. And so I think that that is my fear. I hear you. It's great, but that sounds like more of what we've seen in the past, which is that people who have been marginalized are brought into the system, made a part of the system, and then come to do the system's bidding in ways that allow for the continuation of the systems to be oppressive. And so then the question is, does your existence actually, and mine too, in my space, does it enable the continuation of oppression? Because it says, well, look it, we've hired Michael and we've hired a whole bunch of other people. We've done good work here, but is that enough? I don't know it is. It is because I don't know that it fundamentally transforms the system. I think it changes the face of the people who are in the system, except on the margins. Again, I do feel like there are, I will fully acknowledge that I think that there are on some outcomes, you might have some improvements, but I don't think it dismantles racial inequality or the systems that produce it. I don't think it dismantles class inequality or systems that produce it. I actually fear, because of what I've seen in this round, but also because of what I've seen with regards to racial processes of kind of racialization and racial inequality, that what it does is then to say, well, what are you talking about? Look at all the black people at Harvard. If they can make it, clearly anyone can make it, and then it enables the system to continue to operate in a kind of unequal, inequitable, and frankly oppressive ways that it can. So when my brother says, well, you're at Harvard, that means that anyone can make it, I say to him, that's the reason why I'm at Harvard, so that you can think that anyone can make it, and it justifies the continued oppression of folks who have been left behind, which, by the way, is the vast majority. And so that's what I'm grappling with, Michael. And so this is I'm trying to engage honestly around what it is that I'm struggling with. I want us to be in spaces where we can make a difference, but I know how we're often integrated, and we're integrated in ways that make us tools of the system, as opposed to the kind of site or tools for the system's dismantling, and the seeds around which we produce something that would be far less oppressive and harmful. I just keep talking, so I'm wondering what Kyle and Jem think about my foolishness.
I don't think you're foolish at all. I do think that the systems are looking for tokens. They're looking for one of the things that I wanted to talk about when you were talking about the two thoughts you had, and about the system doing exactly what it wanted. And then you talked about the supports that you think can actually be effective, which is that community cohesiveness. Mm-hmm. And in that, the governor put together an advisory panel. And so you've got all these people showing up. And so you talked about the problem, you talked about what would make it good. Then you went to the Department of Corrections, and they're like, oh, can't do that, can't do that, can't do that. Oh, we'll do that. And then all of a sudden now we worked together on a project, and we solved what we could. And so it looks really good. And they get to say that they talked about it. And so my own company got out of that because we didn't want them to think we were supporting your one check off of the 250 suggestions. Yeah. But I do think that as an incarcerated person coming out to speak about things, specifically going back to the story of the little gal who had been to prison for 4 times with no programming, I get to recall those stories, and then I get to come out here and I get to collect the data that supports that story. And then I get to collect the money that supports that story. And then I get to talk to legislators about, this is what's happening in your county. You're getting 38 people returning this quarter who didn't get any programming. What are you doing to them? They are your constituents that you are responsible to, and you're not doing this. And I do think that continuing to bring numbers, continuing to have that data, you do go from being a token and seeing, being able to recognize where you are being used as a token and what things are being tokenized. Yeah. And wanting, trying to turn the Titanic around is difficult. And legislators have really said, I know the problem. I know there's a huge problem with the justice system. We just don't have the bandwidth. That's a true statement. But if you can bring them some information, and they have an alternatives to incarceration program if you meet all these criteria. So in 10 years, 400 people got to utilize it. Well, the data shows that half of the people incarcerated in Oregon leave without doing less than a year. So those 400 people over 10 years, was that really servicing them, or did you just appease people who were complaining? And being able to bring those situations into conversations with the people who care. And the other thing that I was going to say is that I just moved, went to a new town hall the other night, and I talked to the legislator and I said, hey, I'm in your district. Notice the face change. Mm-hmm. Because at the Capitol, everybody knows, formerly incarcerated, coming here with a murder charge, sitting in the pews, testifying, bringing up bills, talking to you and doing this. Oh, now you live in my district. Oh, you're in my area. And the whole face change was different. And so being able to move around all of those things, being able to move freely, knowing that sometimes you're the token, sometimes you're raising what's being tokenized, sometimes you're being alienated for having a background, and sometimes you're being praised for being able to provide a valid point and raise a valid point that nobody else can see because they're still in the train. Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Thank you. That was awesome.
I'm on the train now, Kyle. two things. I'll speak on my point on the effectiveness. For me, it three P's: proximity, on purpose, without production. Proximity, on purpose, without production. That has always opened up lines of communication, strengthened networks, changed minds, given access. For me, that built my bridge that helped me cross what Kyle was talking about, taking the train from being a token and learning how to utilize the tokenism. Because you got to start somewhere. Either you're going to choose to be in the battle or not to be in the battle at all. You cannot pick, oh, I don't like that opponent. You got to pick an opponent. So if you know this is the game and you know who the players are, you have to play your side of the battle. So tokenism is one of them. Code switching is one of them. I mean, these just par for the course. So for me, as a child, being impacted and being given to the Department of Corrections as award of the state from a 16-year-old little brown girl in a very, very, very southern area. It was not lilies and dandelions at all. It was absolutely horrific. And so to which my facts, not to nullify or to detract from them, is not unique to all of the others who are still with us, because in this room, Dr. Smith, it's a us. We don't separate ourselves from our community, whether it's behind the fence or on this side of the fence. It's still us. And those on faculty, they are supportive in this community of us in that. So we don't, this is one of the places I can say as a impacted person, I am very sensitive to the aroma of that stench of how shall I politely say, being ostracized because of my being impacted, however used for whatever purposes, whomever, what organization, job, employee, think that I would be okay with them crossing my boundaries because I'm an impacted person, because I was a child as an impacted and now am an adult. So that's why when I think about the tokenism, I think about the impact of how is my being in a room impactful. I don't come in a room if I feel like I don't have a purpose for being in the room. Everybody who I have any access to will tell you I don't do busy work. I do purposeful work. And so in doing purposeful work as an impacted individual, I'm coming from a disadvantage. So I need to lean into whomever is my authority. So for those who haven't been impacted, sometimes they may look like I'm leaning into that Stockholm syndrome. That may look like I'm leaning into the tokenism. That may look like that, but you don't understand the processes that we are living in survival. We're still in survival mode. On this side of the fence, it doesn't stop. If you, as an unimpacted by the criminal justice system person, is in survival mode, how dare we not be?
So I am appreciating and learning so much from this conversation that somehow has gotten, focused on this question of token versus not. And I think in hearing your responses, all of which I appreciate very much, I think what comes up for me is the way that Kyle put it, whether one is a token or one is identifying when there's been tokenization. All of it, though, seems to suggest working within the current system to affect change. And I think the thing that I'm struggling with, and I think that that's right. So the way in which you are all making clear how it can be used to the benefit of the work that we're trying to do makes perfect sense. But when I think about transformative change, I don't think about that coming from within, where whether you're acting as the token or amplifying situations where folks have been tokenized can be used to our advantage. When I think about making the kind of transformative change that I'm imagining, where we do build these infrastructures of care and we do build infrastructures of a true accountability, that happens to me from a lot of that work is going to happen outside, which doesn't discount that work has to be done from the inside, but the work from the outside is absolutely necessary to, I think, dismantle these systems in a way that I think would produce the kinds of outcomes that we're all interested in. And that's why I don't, I get it. I get my role in my own institution. But when I think about the kind of changes I want to see with my institution, higher education, generally speaking, it doesn't happen from within. My being a token or my identifying when folks have been tokenized doesn't get me the kinds of transformation I want to see. That happens from outside. And so that's what I think that's where I'm grappling. And all of your comments have helped me to get to this place where I understand why that's an issue for me. Each of you is working to transform this, or not transform, to change the system within to produce more just outcomes. And all sorts of respect for each of you for the work that you're doing. And I'm trying to do that too in my way. But I keep wondering about what happens from the outside to undercut these systems that are doing us harm and work towards building these new systems that we imagine can offer the care that we want and offer the spaces of accountability that we also want and need, and what that looks like. And I wonder if you all have thought about that, because some of the work that I really am interested in exploring further is how that happens, how we can make that happen.
What I get is the sense, and thank you, Sandra, for saying that. What I get is the sense of almost like a dismantling of the system to rebuild it into something new. And how would that even take form? It could only take form by, I think, by kind of what you said earlier, which is it's more like it has to be the community of both impacted and non-impacted folks. It has to be. And back to the common ground thing, whatever that might be, that connecting that glue with us to where, because like you said before, that's where the power is. Like if the people together didn't want something happening with their money or their tax dollars, their votes, they would choose differently, but collectively they would choose differently and collectively. And so if the jails are terrible and we all can agree on that, then I think we all would have no problem with the jails being destroyed and rehab centers filling their place or something. But that's kind of the sense of kind of what I'm getting. Is that kind of maybe what you mean?
I do, but I think the sequence would be different. Like it's not like tear it down and let's build. I actually think we should be building those systems now, because people have a hard time imagining. Well, if you're going to get rid of, let's just be crazy. If we're going to get rid of cops, who's going to deal with? But we have to develop systems that allow for us to address the fact that people do harm, and that needs to be addressed. And we need to, be able to. And so you can't be like, well, let's get rid of them and figure it out, right? Build the plane while we're flying. We actually need to be creating organizations and institutions now that do that work so that we could slowly kind of pilfer off the work of these, I think, punitive, harmful systems, while in the community, we're actually doing the hard work of supporting each other, taking care of each other, and also holding each other to account when we do wrong, but in ways that allow for the community to consider the bonds of the community to remain strong. And so not after we eliminate or but now, like, we need to be producing that now. And the abolitionist scholars that I've been reading most closely are very much about let's experiment with what this looks like now, and then focus our attention within our communities on creating those spaces so that when things happen, we don't need to go to cops. We have the space where we can hold, Sandra did this. What you need to speak to what it is you've done. You need to take account of it. We are here. We support you, but you have to, acknowledge and, or however it might look, that create those structures now. And there are spaces where we see those kinds of things happening, not so much. So to some extent in this country, I know of some amazing programs. Of course, they're relatively small, but in other countries we see an outgrowth of these. And we know that in Indigenous communities, these kinds of supports already exist.
Yes.
Can we learn from those and begin the work within our communities to develop that, such that there comes a point where the systems that are currently in place become obsolete, right? We could dismantle it because we already know how we're going to take care of our business. Something like that, I think, is what I was thinking, Michael. But it's all just still very fuzzy in my head because, I'm doing too much on too little sleep. But that's what I'm thinking. We can't all do the work in and outside. So some of us need to do the work that is happening on the outside. How do we do the work outside of these systems to produce the kinds of change that I think that we all want, while some of us are working in the system to chip away, and in the process, hoping to make at least some folks' lives better in the short term, while some others are working on the outside to fundamentally alter or create new systems of care and accountability that will really allow for not just survival, but thriving.
I remembered what I wanted to say when I was starting to talk, and I was talking about your portion where you were saying that the community being engaged with the community connection. And part of that are alternatives to sentencing or to incarceration are done through specialty courts, which would put people back into their community to address whatever their criminal intersection was, be it drugs, be it money, be it, inability to budget your own cash. And I think that those would be great, but that is talking about people who have already intersected with crime. And I know that one of the things, there was the ballot measure 110, which legalized small amounts of drugs here in Oregon, and it failed miserably. COVID came and they didn't have things in place. And so it just didn't go right. And so then they came back with another bill that filled the gaps, and it's not working, of course, either. Yeah. But one of the things that was talked about was prevention and youth. And those are really the things that need to be done in our communities, and between alternatives to incarceration and prior to crime, addressing families. And it is in our communities. And I've gone and listened to Indigenous crime resolves, how they deal with crime in their community. And it is a holistic, the perpetrator has accountability, and then also the victim gets, recompensated. And there's a book, and it's called Until We Reckon. And it has to do, yes, it's a
Danielle Sered. That's right. I love her. Yeah.
Beautiful book. And it really does. It talks about that intersection where mercy and accountability meet. Right. And that's justice. Right. And we don't have that.
For me, my short answer would be not to reinvent the wheel. Miss Sandra, it's real hard for me because I was just raised like that. So no disrespect, Miss Sandra. Everything you envision is already being done around the country somewhere. We're working in silos. If we have a concerted effort to streamline and to connect and pool our resources, we could get the work done tomorrow. We are working in silos. I personally have direct firsthand knowledge of several different organizations, this one and others that I am currently in work with, that is doing the outside work. Like you said, we are infiltrated. We're everywhere. Those other places that's not in the job that you're talking about, that's a longer discussion, we're there already. Organizations, national organizations, international organizations, those on the inside, those boots on the ground, community organizers, grassroots organizers, those who are in the Senate halls, and we're everywhere. That's the whole problem. We're everywhere. This pre-trial division right here is absolutely fantastic. They are cutting edge in the work that they are currently been doing. Does do everybody know they have resources? I'm talking about top of the line APPR resources, and coming out with new ones. They're in the printing press right now. The work is out here. It's been done. It's in the process, been done, but it's too scattered. That's where I feel like we should start, and we need to see what we got, who's where, and get together.
I think that makes a lot of sense. What you're describing is creating a network across the country where we are connected. We understand what each other are doing. We support each other through the work that we're doing, and we build on it. We expand, and that is something I'm willing to put some energy into doing. So I really appreciate that you would even bring that up, Jem. And it might mean that you and I need to talk further to get this network going, connected, and doing that kind of work.